Right now, the NYPD one step closer to having an inspector general overseeing its policing. The mayor not mincing words. He says this will help the crooks and the city may have blood in its hands. But many city's council members say this is the best way to crack down on racial profiling. Tonight, we dig in. And next, George Zimmerman on trial day 2. Crime scene photos showing Trayvon Martin lying dead in the grass were shown in court for the first time today. Meanwhile, the jury waits for Zimmerman himself to take the stand. And later, the president made a sweeping address on climate change, but will the heat emanating from D.C. melt his hopes for agreement on any kind of environmental standards? Yes, that was a bad pun. We're going to hear from former White House insider on his take. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. A lot to get to in the next 60 minutes, but thank you for joining us this Tuesday evening, June 25th. And let's start tonight with an issue we have spent months here covering, and Dominic has been in Lower Manhattan on many a day outside the courthouse on, and that, of course, is the Stop and Frisk trial, which has really been put on trial. The New York City Council one step closer to passing the Community Safety Act. This act, controversial in some eyes, it has two parts to it. One bill would create an independent inspector general who would basically oversee the NYPD. The other would allow those who feel that they have been, again here the key word feel, that they've been improperly profiled based on age, gender, race, or sexual orientation to be able to sue the city, albeit not for monetary damages. Mayor Bloomberg, he made it clear he thinks this is very bad for New York City.
What are you going to say at the next eulogy you have to give after these bills are passed, when the family is 100% convinced that had you not passed this bill, that their child would still be alive?
Police unions also opposed to it. They say their members will now hesitate to describe certain attributes of a suspect, all because of fear of litigation.
It's wrong to make a police officer acting in good faith, responding to a crime victim, to make him personally liable for doing nothing more than transmitting a description of a perpetrator.
But Councilman Jumaane Williams, he is the primary sponsor of both bills, says that's just not the case.
You show me in the bill where it would prevent you from using descriptions, and I will withdraw the bill today.
As of now, there is only a veto-proof majority for the bill establishing an inspector general. Translation, the mayor, who's probably going to veto this thing, then it's got to get to back to the city council, and they got to get the votes here to make the thing go through. Okay, and this thing could move as early as tomorrow. I want to bring in our panel on this, Dominic Carter, who I mentioned before, political journalist, author, of course. Mayo Bartlett, former chief of the Bias Crimes Unit at the Westchester County DA's office. Got a lot of questions for him tonight on various subjects. And Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent. And Dom, I want to start with you with what came out of the city council. And Jumaane Williams, who we heard from, will be joined by tomorrow evening on the subject on RFL. But first, do the math for me. Council will approve this thing. The mayor, he's going to veto it. Do you think the votes are there that is currently constructed this thing could pass, override the veto?
I'm really glad you started out by asking about the math, because that's a big question mark, Richard. Here's what we know. You need 34 votes out of the 51 to maintain an override of a veto from the mayor. So what do we know at this point? Mayor Bloomberg, Police Commissioner Kelly, they are kicking and screaming bloody murder. You can bet your life on it the mayor is going to veto this. So then the question becomes, does the council have 34 votes to sustain an override? Now, normally one would say yes, but this bill is rather ironic, and it seems like the winds of fate are against the mayor and the police commissioner on stop and frisk, not only from a litigation point of view with the council, but also with the federal court, as we are awaiting any day for Judge Scheinlin to come back with her ruling. But here's the question, and it was rather ironic that the chairperson, the committee chairperson, Peter Vallone Jr., someone who you've sparred with on this very program, the council chose to vote to completely bypass him. he sides with the mayor. They bypassed one of their own, took the vote to the floor, and so we really don't know, because here's what the mayor has at his use. He can offer goodies for people that'll go with him. He can threaten you. So we don't know if they have the 34 votes to maintain an override.
It's funny, even the mayoral candidates, Andrew, right? They haven't gone as far as seemingly the city council, most of them.
No, most of them haven't, and of course this pits Christine Quinn against the other Democrats who are running. Christine Quinn supports it, and so there's been criticism from Bill de Blasio and from other candidates in the Democratic field. By the way, there are also some procedural objections in the city council too. Dominic mentioned the sort of bypassing of Peter Vallone. There are some people who are going to vote no on this thing just because it sort of jumps the process.
Now, let's talk about the two big parts to it. First, the idea of inspector general. And I understand why the cops don't love this idea here, basically somebody policing the police, but it's not without precedent. You got a lot of big cities that have inspector generals, right?
Absolutely. I think an inspector general, actually, the police department, if it believes that its policies are just, should welcome and invite an inspector general, because the inspector general now removes the specter of the police policing themselves. You have now a neutral and hopefully objective party that's going to scrutinize police conduct, and they're going to determine whether there's a pattern. Right now, a New York Civil Liberties Union has established that virtually 90% of all people stopped and frisked are guilty of nothing.
Yep. Forget what color they are, they're guilty of nothing. But then you get to the second part, which to me, I understand why, if you're an officer, you say, time out for a second. You just have to feel now that you're being profiled or you're being stopped unjustly. And you can have a suit, albeit not for monetary damages. Translate what this really means, because it seems like, what are you suing for? Who decides if you are or aren't being? It seems so subjective.
Well, number one, who's going to bring that suit? Because right now you can bring a lawsuit. No one's telling you you're not. You can't. There's no requirement for you to articulate anything in particular for your suit to be brought forward. Now, it may not survive scrutiny. It may be dismissed by the court. It may be dismissed on motion by the defense. But at the end of the day, before someone brings that suit, you're going to want to know more than I had an inkling that I was stopped for no reason. There'll be objective facts that I don't know any attorney who's going to take a lawsuit where there's no basis to believe the police did something wrong.
Could it have a chilling impact on the cops? You've worked with law enforcement, obviously a big part of your career where a police officer is just not worth the hassle. I don't need this in my life.
No, because if the police believe you've committed a crime, then they have probable cause. And if there's probable cause, then they'll be able to arrest you. If they're not certain, they have reasonable suspicion. It's a little bit less than probable cause, but it's still a reasonable basis for them to go and ask you questions and investigate. So as long as police have that, they should be fine. And if ultimately they find out nothing happened, then there won't be an arrest.
Maybe a few less furtive movements, right?
Absolutely.
I keep thinking, how many times have we heard people defend stop and frisk on this program by saying, hey, if you haven't done anything wrong, you got nothing to be afraid of? Why doesn't that same standard apply to the police department? And why is the mere imposition of that standard on the police department enough for the mayor and the police chief to say, whoa, you know, what happens the next time you're eulogizing somebody? That's a ridiculous scare tactic from the mayor.
They may have gone too far with the doubling down, but I think that there is, in the law enforcement community, that they're being demonized for doing their job. And they didn't create the policy. The policy was created in Police Plaza. They're following. Now, maybe privately some cops are saying, hey, I like the fact that I don't have to make my number anymore, and I don't have to hit my quotas because no one's going to enforce this if they got somebody, Inspector General, looking over their shoulder. This is interesting how it's going to play out. But Dominic, just to go over again what we got to look out for. We got Judge Scheinle, who's got 2 cases right now on the same subject that we're waiting to hear her answer from in the City Council, and as early as this week, right?
Well, it could come down tomorrow. It could come down a month from now. Normally, it takes several months for a federal judge
cases,
to release a ruling.
City Council, though, that we'll hear sooner, right?
Oh yes, we'll hear from the City Council very soon. Then you can it's going to be almost robotic. Bloomberg's going to veto this, and then it goes back to the council. And so when you add, Richard, the fact that there's an election, a high-profile election for mayor taking place, that ought to kind of convolutes everything. And, you know, no matter what, the mayor could be Bill Thompson, an African-American. Then a mayor is never going to agree to have another watchful eye looking over on his watch or her watch. They're never going to agree to it.
Yeah.
You know, so, but again, remember the politics of this. Let's say Bloomberg is able to keep his veto. Judge Scheinle may come down and say, this is what I say, and by the way, the feds that submitted a brief in this asking for a federal monitor, that's exactly what I'm doing.
Right, you could have a federal monitor instead of an inspector general.
And the best way really to be effective in policing is to go back to community policing, but that involves building trust, not making everyone in the community feel that they're a suspect. So if you really want to know what's happening in the community, ask the people who live there. And believe me, nobody wants a safe community more than those people. So when you trust your local police officers, you're willing to go over and talk to them and tell them, hey, you know, this is what's going on around the corner and these are the people who are involved and you should be there around 5:45. That's when it happens. Not by stopping those people too, because now you just build distrust and nothing positive comes from that.
Programming note, tomorrow we will be joined by Councilman Jumaane Williams. He's going to talk obviously about the act here that has made so many headlines here. Again, he'll be joining us at 6 p.m. tomorrow night here right on RFL. Now, in the meantime, we're asking you at home to sound off on a policy that's created so much debate here, Stop and Frisk. Do you believe the NYPD can police themselves, or they need oversight? Just make your opinions heard here. Just go to Facebook and Twitter. When we come back, George Zimmerman on trial. We're going to have the latest from the courtroom where Trayvon's parents, racked by emotion, literally had to step away from the testimony they heard today. We'll catch up today on what happened in Florida right after this.